moving on, let's have a look at the headlines with Jason Reed, who's UK lead at Young Voices and political commentator. Jason, what's making the headlines? What's jumped out at you this morning?
Good afternoon, Trisha. Well, the story that is leading a lot of the news bulletins is still about Boris Johnson's leadership and about whether or not Partygate is going to be enough to force him out of office or force some kind of vote of no confidence in his leadership. Spoiler alert, I'm afraid it won't be, and he will be in office for a long time. But there are a lot of Conservative MPs who are making it known that they are not happy. We've had a few new people say that they have submitted their letters to the 1922 committee, meaning that they want to have a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson's leadership.
Wow.
I think we're now at the point where the number of people publicly who have said they've done that is actually higher than it was when Theresa May faced her vote of no confidence, which, of course, she went on to win that vote. But nonetheless, it was enough to trigger the vote in the first place. I think a lot of that, though, is to do with the fact that Boris Johnson seems to have a much stronger position than Theresa May did at that time. And so the ones who have submitted their letters this time around, they're much more keen to make it public. That's why it seems that we have a high number who have said so publicly, but we still haven't hit that threshold. We still don't have enough people who have sent in the letters for Sir Graham Brady to trigger that vote. And so lots of people, of course, are looking forward now to the next general election, and it seems more likely than ever, I think, that Boris Johnson will be the one to lead the Conservative Party into that election. And so lots of people thinking about what that will mean when it comes to the red wall and the new sort of fault lines that are emerging among voters, and whether Boris Johnson will be able to hold on to those votes. A lot of the way he was able to get those votes in the first place was because of, first of all, because of Brexit. Of course, the last election happened in 2019 when the Tory campaign slogan was "Get Brexit Done," and more broadly to do with cultural and social concerns dominating voter preferences, whereas now economic concerns are very much on the rise again. We've heard a lot about the cost of living crisis, and there are a lot of people saying that the government, even with its most recent package, doesn't really have those convincing answers on the economic questions anymore, which could cost them when it comes to the ballot box.
And Jason, it's a bit like, I mean, the parallel with Britain and the United States is that you've got a party in opposition that's kind of all over the place, that doesn't, people don't know where to go. So I'm sure a lot of voters will be thinking, if not Boris as a leader, who else? I mean, Rishi Sunak was the golden boy until fairly recently. And if not the Conservatives, what else?
This is definitely a good point, and this is a criticism that is levelled at Keir Starmer very often as not being a strong enough leader of the opposition. When he first rose to the leadership of the Labour Party, people would say things like he's forensic and he's very lawyerly and things like that. Whereas perhaps what you really want in a leader of the opposition is someone who's less forensic and lawyerly and more a bit of a barnstorming leader who can rile up a lot of opposition to the government and really hold them to account. As for opponents within the Conservative Party, to be honest, I find this a less convincing argument, because it's certainly true that Rishi Sunak was the front runner and he no longer is. His polling ratings have tumbled. But there are a lot of people, both in cabinet and in the Conservative backbenches, who certainly believe that they would do a very good job of Prime Minister. And if Boris Johnson were for some reason to leave office tomorrow, I think we would have no shortage of candidates. I think, in fact, there would be a very large pool of candidates from within the Conservative Party, of people wanting to stand for the leadership. Of course, the question then is, would that be a good idea? And a lot of people saying perhaps that would not be a good idea, to have a quite damaging, quite bruising leadership contest, especially when you have someone like Boris Johnson in office who has a winning record in the past.
I was going to say, you put that so nicely. I would have just said bloodbath. There'd be a bloodbath. Now, ministers to escape sack for ethics breaches, and this comes back to the whole thing. One of the things I'm going to be discussing on my show tomorrow with the Faith panel is, people are lacking trust in government. So just quickly, because we've only got a couple of minutes, sum up for me the feelings around this whole thing about ethics and the rewriting of standards rule books and things like that.
Well, it's unfortunate timing, to say the least, that just as Sue Gray's Partygate report is published, we suddenly have Boris Johnson wanting to change the way that the ministerial code works and make it so that ministers no longer have to resign necessarily if they break the ministerial code. A lot of the questions that were asked about Partygate were about whether Boris Johnson technically lied to Parliament, because if he did, that would have been a breach of the ministerial code. It's important to state that clause is still there, so it is still a resignable offence to lie to Parliament. This is just a few tweaks to the rules. For example, the Standards Commissioner, Lord Geit, has to ask the Prime Minister's permission now if he wants to start investigations on his own. He can't do that of his own authority. So there are some question marks here and there about what Boris Johnson is trying to achieve by centralising power in this way, but it's not some grand overhaul of standards. I think it's just solidifying what we've known for a long time, that standards in politics, especially at the top, are changing.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. As I said, again, a lot of people have a lot of distrust now in a lot of institutions, and this doesn't help. Thank you so much for your time. That's Jason Reed. They're talking about what's making the headlines politically.